So why don't we start with a little settling in together, just a short sit and coming into our bodies and releasing all the words that was just shared and allowing yourself to find a way into your present moment experience. Often the body is a great place to arrive in this moment right here. Trusting that you will connect with whatever is important for you. And some of the words and ideas that are not important, you can simply just let them float by and trust your body, trust your heart to help you sort out what feels useful for you this morning. You can stay with your eyes closed if that supports the listening, or you can open your eyes if that's helpful to have the visual. I think some of you are sitting maybe a little bit far away from the screen, so I don't know if you can even see me, but again, trusting yourself and trusting your own way of listening this morning. So as Gail was talking about, what I want to offer this morning is a teaching about the Fourth Foundation of Mindfulness. And I want to focus in on one of those teachings that's within the Fourth Foundation, which is the Four Noble Truths. But first, I just wanted to say a little bit about the Fourth Foundation and what it is that we are exploring within the Fourth Foundation. So it's called Mindfulness of Dhammas, Mindfulness of Dharmas. And sometimes this can feel a little bewildering, because often we may have heard about Dhamma talks, we've heard about Dharma teachers. And in this context, it may be a little confusing, like what is it we're paying attention to with being mindful of Dhammas? And it actually turns out that this word Dhamma can have multiple meanings within the teachings. And in this context, Dhammas is referring to, the best description I can come up with is that it's referring to lawful patterns, lawful universal patterns connected to how we get caught, how we suffer, how we get entangled. So there's a description of some of those component parts that leads to suffering states. And then the Fourth Foundation, this Mindfulness of Dhammas, also outline the path leading out of suffering. What are some of those component parts that leads us to release suffering? So for example, the 7 awakening factors is within the Fourth Foundation of Mindfulness, and that's a really good outline of different factors of mind that are connected to awakening, that's connected to full release of patterns of suffering. So the Buddha got to see these patterns within his own heart and mind, as he was sitting there under the Bodhi tree, observing his moment-to-moment experience. At some point, he really got to see that there was these universal lawful patterns connected with how his mind got caught in suffering. And he also got to see what patterns are connected to the release of suffering. And he got to see that it wasn't just patterns within his own mind, but that the patterns that he discovered are patterns that are universal, lawful patterns for each one of us. So as we sit down on the cushion and practice, in our daily life or in retreat, we connect with the body, we become aware of all the sensations of the body. And then we begin to see, like we explored last time, that we have these 6 sense doors. And with each impression that we are connecting with at each sense door, there is this feeling tone, this Vedanā that arises, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral experiences arising in each and every moment, arising and passing away. And we also get to see that our minds usually have these reactive patterns connected to these feeling tones. We explored that last time. So an almost automatic, immediate grasping for, craving, holding on to pleasant experiences. I want that. Give me more of that. I want to hold on to this. And a very immediate, automatic reactivity around unpleasant. For example, unpleasant in the body. I don't want this. I don't want to be in contact with this. This shouldn't be here. My meditation right now is not the way it should be. It should be pleasant. And then this tuning out with something that's a little bit more neutral, something that doesn't grab our attention. And we get to see again these patterns of mind, these reactive patterns of mind, and we also get to see that the mind can sometimes release its usual reactive patterns, and then there are moments of quiet, moments of stillness, moments of calm, moments of contentment. This is often where we space out, because often those moments are a little bit more neutral. And so we may not even notice that we were really in a suffering state. And then the next moment, there's been some release, and now the mind is actually in a more contented place. But because it's not loud, it's not dramatic, that more neutral sense of peacefulness, then we don't notice. But this is what we get to see. And then we get to see in our own minds more and more that there are really something very lawful about our experience that we get to see over time, that it's not just random how we get into suffering states. There is a certain fabrication of it. And when we find ourselves in a more peaceful state, that also has a certain unfolding to it, a lawful unfolding that leads to a deepening peace. So today I want to, as I said, I want to focus on the Four Noble Truths, and I specifically want to focus on the third noble truth, which is the ending of suffering. Because I think that's, often why we come to practice. We hear a lot about dukkha, we hear a lot about suffering, but we come here, right? Because we are recognizing, we're noticing that there's something that's not quite contented. Either it's a very loud type of pain, suffering, or it's a way more subtle dissatisfaction. I'm not quite satisfied with my life, and that brings us to the cushion. And we want to know that there is indeed an ending to suffering. It is possible for all of us through this practice. So the first noble truth says there is suffering. The second noble truth say there's a cause of suffering, and that cause of suffering is craving. The third noble truth is there is an ending to craving. There's an ending to suffering. And then the fourth noble truth is that there's a path leading to the ending of suffering, which is the path that we're practicing. It's the Noble Eightfold Path. When we hear the first noble truth, there is suffering. And again, my experience with working with students is sometimes it's like, I don't want to hear this word one more time. Like, stop talking about suffering. This whole path seems to be about suffering, and we can get really fatigued thinking about it. But what's important with the Buddha's instructions is that he said that suffering has to be understood. Suffering has to be recognized. That's the instruction that he gave with the first noble truth. There is suffering, and the suffering has to be recognized. And it's often because we don't actually recognize suffering that we have more suffering. So there is this basic recognition of what is it he's pointing to? What is this suffering he's pointing to? And it's this type of recognition that can lead us to the ending of suffering. So it's said that there is suffering that leads to more suffering, and it's said that there is suffering that leads out of suffering. So we are interested in the second possibility, suffering that leads out of suffering, being with our suffering in a way that leads us out of suffering. So what is this suffering that he wants us to recognize? The Pali word for suffering is called dukkha, and there's a type of suffering that the Buddha called Dukkha Dukkha. So if you didn't get it the first time, then maybe we get it the second time. It's like double dukkha, not just dukkha, but Dukkha Dukkha. And Dukkha Dukkha is the very obvious types of suffering that we can all recognize as suffering. We can recognize them in our own experience. We can recognize them in each other's lives. And it's a type of suffering that comes with embodiment. You know, we have these bodies. We've talked about this before. They have an expiry date. From the day that we're born, these bodies are heading towards their end. And so they have all these ailments, you know, that's not meant to be there. It comes with having a body. And then we have an attachment systems. We bond, we form deep relationships. And part of that is our human fabric as well. It's part of our human nature to bond very deeply. And what happens with these relationships is that, you know, at some point they won't continue on, because death is part of this human life. Sickness, aging, and death is part of this human life. So we will experience loss at some point. So having these human bodies and these human hearts comes with Dukkha Dukkha. And it's not always evident to us, but we can all recognize that there are these moments of Dukkha Dukkha that we all get to experience. But the Buddha also pointed to way more subtle forms of dukkha that we actually don't recognize, that often we don't even understand as dukkha. He said that everything that is conditioned has dukkha nature. So what is everything that is conditioned? That is absolutely everything except the unconditioned, except Nibbana. Everything else that we experienced is conditioned. This also means that it's impermanent. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. It is not meant to last. And because of this impermanent conditioned nature, it has dukkha nature, meaning it's not reliable. It's not permanent. We cannot find ground. Here in Fuerteventura, yesterday I just went for a walk on the beach, and it was looking like what I was walking on, the sand, just in the edge of the water, it looked really stable to me. You know, it looked really solid, like it would give in a little bit, but you know, it would definitely hold my body weight. So I was walking, and as I was walking, the sand was just giving away under my feet. So with each step, it was just the sand sort of falling away. And that's a little bit like life sometimes, right? That we sort of connect with something in our lives, and then there's this sense of it sort of dissipating. It's not solid, it's not stable. We cannot hold on to it. Many times our experiences is like a sandcastle. You know, we have an experience, we assume it's pretty permanent, and yet it isn't really meant to last. So there's this more subtle level of dukkha, and that goes for even our most pleasant experiences. It was actually this recognition of the dukkha nature of really pleasant experiences that led the Buddha to begin his particular middle path, where he discovered, I have to investigate my mind. I have to explore my mind, and I'm not going to get up from this, underneath this Bodhi tree, before I've seen how the suffering comes to be. So he had trained in something that's called the jhanas. I think maybe I mentioned those last time. These are very, very blissful absorption states that we can train in. And at the time, it was really believed that, this is my understanding, I'm not totally sure, but my understanding is that at the time it was believed that you could connect with the divine and the unconditioned through these jhana states, that was a path to really reach awakening, reach enlightenment. So he trained in all these jhanas. There are 8 jhana states, and he got to the 8th jhana state, and he came out of that 8th jhana state, and then he said, and they're more and more peaceful, each of them. He came out, and then he said, but this too is impermanent. It arises when I cultivate and train my mind, when I sit down and I focus. I can enter these states, but as soon as I get up from the cushion, these states vanish. And they actually don't help me with my everyday suffering. They're really blissful, pleasant states. I've never experienced something as blissful and pleasant. And yet they also have this dukkha nature. So you may think about other experiences, maybe not jhana states, but some kind of pleasant experience that's been very, very important for you, and sense into the dukkha that can be associated with it. The sense that it is very pleasant, but I can't possibly keep it. Sometimes I can't repeat it. I can't hold on to it. I don't have control over it. And that's that dukkha nature. So he wanted to find an unconditioned peace, a peace that wasn't reliant on conditioned. And that really took him on the search. A more accurate translation of dukkha is bad emptiness. That's kind of funny, I think. Bad emptiness. What is that? Bad emptiness. But we can intuitively feel into bad emptiness. What does that feel like, bad emptiness? Something is hollow, void, doesn't have substance, and it's bad. It can feel bad that we can't find solidity in experiences. So this is the first noble truth, recognizing dukkha dukkha, and then recognizing the much more subtle forms of suffering that we often overlook, and that we may take for something that we should try to get more of, something we should try to gather, something we should try to hold on to, because we don't see the dukkha nature. We don't realize the impermanent, conditioned nature. The second noble truth is that there is a cause for suffering, and that cause is craving. So the Pali word for craving is Taṇhā, and the more literal translation of Taṇhā is thirst. Can you feel into this thirst? Right? So it can come in very loud forms. We really want something. We're so thirsty for something to happen. I really want that car. I really want that partner. I really want that career. I really want that good meditation. We can basically have thirst for anything. And then there's the very subtle levels of thirst. When you sit and you have, maybe there's some ease and well-being that's arising, but yet you have this tiny little restlessness that's there. Right? You can't quite settle into this moment. It's not quite contented, but there's not quite enough contentment. And so there's always this little what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next. This energy of thirst driving us forward, looking for something other than what's here in this moment. And this thirst, this Taṇhā, the flip side of Taṇhā is aversion, right? They sort of come together, because as soon as we thirst for something, we want for something, we crave for something, there's other things that we don't want, other things that we push away, other things that we try to get rid of. So they're like a pair. They almost always come together. Well, they always come together. So this thirst can have this burning quality to it. When we check it with our mindfulness, we may realize that there's this, again, this burning sense that I want something more, I want something else. So my son now is almost 32, but I still have many vivid memories of him as a toddler. And I don't know if you've heard about the Buddha often divided people into different types. So there's the greedy type, there's the aversive type, and then there's the deluded type. So the greedy type is someone that always wants something and is really focused on wanting something. I want more, and really is looking for where's the next pleasant experiences. And he's really, I hope he doesn't, well, he won't listen to this, but I don't think he would mind me saying it, but he is definitely much more of a greed type. And I remember as a toddler, like he would, some of the first words that he would say is, I want that one. And it wasn't even anything in specific, but he would sort of circle around our living room and point to things. I want that one. I want that one. I want that one. I want that one. And his little face would get more and more red, and he would move himself into this frantic state of thirst. He actually didn't want any of it. As soon as you gave it to him, it was like, I want that one. I want that one. I want that one. So he was really just in this state of craving for something that didn't even have an object. It was just a state of wanting. And I think in the beginning, it was sort of enjoyable, but then it got to be very painful. Like, and you could sense this burning quality that he was burning up inside with unfulfilled wanting that really couldn't be, this thirst couldn't be quenched. You know, there wasn't anything that could quench this wanting that he felt so strongly. A while ago, my partner showed me a video, and it's a video of, again, she's a little bit more than a toddler, maybe 3 or 4. And it's a video, a YouTube clip of this little girl having an interaction with her parent. And she's having a meltdown, you know, and she's having a total meltdown. And what she keeps saying is, why can't I stop thinking about waffles? And she's crying and crying and crying. Why can't I stop thinking about waffles? And it's the most painful thing for her that she can't, she's so fixated on waffles, and she cannot get those waffles out of her mind. And she's having a real painful experience with this sense of this compulsive thinking about waffles. So these are extreme examples, but you may recognize times when you're having a very painful experience and there's something that you have latched onto that you cannot stop compulsively fantasizing about. The second example is actually an example of when craving turns into clinging or attachment. So once we have put a hand, or we have solidified, or we have grasped for a certain experience and formed an attachment to it, then it's gone from craving to clinging, trying to hold on to it. And once we've clung to something, then the pain is in the fear of losing it. I want to keep this thing. I want to hold on to it. I don't want to lose it. And we feel the dukkha of the fear of loss. How do I keep it? How do I hold on to this? Is everybody still with me? And again, taking time to check in with yourself. And as I said, just take in whatever parts of this that's helpful for you and let the rest go. It's a lot of words in the middle of, maybe you've been sitting already for about an hour together. So the mind may have calmed some and stilled some. I wanted to briefly bring in another teaching that's in the Fourth Foundation. It's the teaching about what's called dependent origination. So the Buddha, as part of outlining these lawful patterns of how we get to suffer and how we find a way out of suffering, he saw that there are these 12 links that he named dependent origination, that is connected with how suffering comes to be. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but just some of them we already touched on today and that we started exploring last time. So there's the link where there's this contact. We have these 6 sense doors, and there's the moment when there's contact with sense impressions. And then that leads to Vedanā, feeling tone, as we talked about. So in each and every moment, there is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral arising at any of the 6 sense doors. And then often, if there is not mindfulness and equanimity in the mind, then right away, those feeling tones then leads to wanting or liking or disliking, trying to get rid of the patterns of craving and aversion, or tuning out with neutral Vedanā. And then again, if there's not mindfulness present and some equanimity present, then that link then leads to this link of clinging, now holding on to, taking ownership over, wanting to keep it. And then again, if there's no mindfulness, equanimity presence, then that link leads to what the Buddha called becoming. And becoming is the sense of identity that we form around our attachments. We form a sense of self. I'm the one that has this job, I have this house, I am good at cooking, I am like this. So we form a sense of self-identity around our attachments. This is how a self is born. A sense of self is born in each and every moment. And then that sense of self, because it's impermanent, it will age and die. So there's an actual ending to our lives, but there's also moment to moment aging and dying, meaning that this sense of identity that we create cannot be maintained, cannot be held on to in connection with reality. We can't hold on to certain experiences of ourselves. They fall apart. And then we have dukkha, we have suffering. So this is just a little section, and I'll return to it a little bit later when we talk about the third noble truth, but just wanted to mention these links, and hopefully they intuitively make sense for you in your own experience. You can notice this formation. So the instruction connected with the second noble truth is to abandon craving. So we recognize dukkha, and we recognize how craving leads to dukkha, and then we abandon craving. That's the instruction that the Buddha is giving us with the second noble truth. And that then takes us to the third noble truth. When craving has been abandoned, then we have the ending of suffering. And this ending of suffering has to be realized. So there's the big ending of suffering, which in our tradition means becoming what's called an arhat, a fully awakened being. There are 4 stages of awakening, and the arhat is the fully awakened being who is fully uprooted the causes leading to suffering, the causes leading to craving. So this being who's an arhat, in their mind, there will never ever be another arising of craving. And once they die, their body dies, they will not arise again in this wheel of samsara. They are now released from this cycle of birth and rebirth. That's one perspective, but there's also rebirth in every single moment. And there's also the possibility of ending suffering in every single moment. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit later, but I just wanted to mention it, because that's all those little moments of releasing craving and realizing the ending of suffering, is what will lead us into these more deeper moments of awakening, these deeper moments of uprooting these habit patterns in the mind. So we can practice freedom right here, right now, in each and every moment, which is the good news. We don't have to wait until we realize full awakening. So the fourth noble truth is that there is a road leading to the end of suffering. And the instruction is that this noble Eightfold Path has to be developed. So we have to cultivate the noble Eightfold Path for us to, again, release the patterns of suffering. So the noble Eightfold Path is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. And I won't go into all of this because this is a whole teaching in itself, but just to say you are all already practicing this. I'm sure you are, even though you may not know it, but to be coming here and spending this morning together again, it speaks to how some of these factors have already developed in your mind for you to want to explore the mind. Often we talk about that the Noble Eightfold Path can also be talked about the three trainings that are really important. So there's a training in what's called Sila, or morality, basic, ethical behavior, ethical attunement to try our best to not cause harm to ourselves and to other beings, and really take that up as a practice to be in an ethical way, avoiding harmful behavior, harmful speech, harmful behaviors. And this base of Sila then supports that the mind can actually sit still in meditation. So actually very few people are able to sit still in meditation. So again, I just want to say that it takes some level of Sila to want to come to this path and want to explore your mind. I'm not saying that you all have a perfectly still mind. That's not what I'm talking about, but just that the wish to go inside and to introspect your mind, there has to be some training, or there has to be some development of Sila for us to want to do that. And then the last thing to develop is Paññā, this liberating wisdom. So this is again the Four Noble Truths, seeing that with a lot of clarity, with a base in Sila, with a base in this level of concentration, stability of mind. We get to see things with clarity, and we get to have insights that are liberating for us. So I wanted to return to the third noble truth, and specifically how we might practice abandoning craving in our daily lives. So on the cushion when you sit in meditation, but also what might be ways you could practice abandoning craving, recognizing dukkha, recognizing when you cling, when you crave things, when you try to get rid of things, and abandoning it, releasing it, so that you can begin to have these moments of momentary freedom that comes with that. So I think last time when we talked about the second and third foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of feeling tone and mindfulness of mind, we talked a fair bit about how we can rest with feeling tone, how we can learn to recognize feeling tone, and how we can learn to ride the wave of feeling tone so that we don't end up in all of this reactivity around pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral experiences. So actually, if we can It's the secret teachings of freedom in the here and now, because suffering starts with the reactivity to feeling tone. That's one description. There's the teaching about the first and second arrow. I'm trying to remember if I brought this up last time. I think I did, right? Where the Buddha is saying that even a noble one, even someone who has liberated their mind, they still have pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral experiences, because it goes along with being embodied. We're not going to meditate our way out of having a painful experience in the body, or having a pleasant experience when we see, I don't know, a flower, or having a pleasant experience as we meditate. Those feeling tones are sort of a given program that comes along with having a human form. That's the first arrow. But there's the potential of resting with the feeling tone without moving into reactive patterns based on the feeling tone. As soon as we, this is what I heard Christina Feldman, a very senior Dhamma teacher, and I thought it was really brilliant, but it was an example of what happens when we crave a pleasant experience. So let's say we are seeing a sunset, and it's a pleasant experience for us, seeing the sunset. There's a pleasant experience at the eye door, there's a pleasant experience at the mind door. And as soon as we crave it, as soon as we cling to it, then that pleasant experience is actually in the past. We're no longer with just pleasant. That pleasant, we just put that pleasant experience in the past by now creating a story about it, trying to repeat it, trying to have more of it. So if you can just tune into this for a moment, how many times are we in the middle of having just a pleasant experience, and then the mind comes in and wants to own it, solidify it, repeat it. And what happens with that pleasant experience is all of a sudden it's no longer just pleasant. So there's a way that we can begin to notice, could this simply be pleasant without me needing to do something with it? Or could this experience in the body right now, could it simply be a wave of unpleasant without me developing this whole story about, oh, I think this is happening to my body, and I'm also not a good meditator, and it's also too late in the day for me to meditate. I do best at 7 in the morning. This is way too late. All the extra layers that we fabricate around a very simple, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral experience. So we can teach ourselves to see, could this simply just be unpleasant? And what happens if I name it just unpleasant or pleasant or neutral? And can I rest with that wave without a lot of further fabrication? That's one level that we can practice on. And even when we are caught, let's say there's an unpleasant sound, and now the mind is really busy with, you know, what am I going to do about this? And I have to tell the neighbors, and they shouldn't be using their lawnmower or a snowblower for you guys, probably snowblower at this point, at 8 in the morning. You know, there should be a rule here. What would happen if you notice what the mind is doing, all these extra layers, and came back and said, unpleasant Vedanā at the ear door, simply unpleasant Vedanā at the ear door. Can it simply be that? And then the next link again is about this Taṇhā, this craving, and again the flip side is the aversion. we can recognize and release that. And the most important part is that we recognize, okay, right now this mind is wanting something, or this mind is wanting to get rid of something. Can I just notice those patterns of mind and see if I can be mindful with them, and when it's time, release them. I had a long retreat last fall, and a couple of months into the retreat, my mind was moving through a lot of aversion. Sometimes we talk about there's a purification that can happen on long retreats. And the mind was starting to just have this really grumpy attitude. Everything was just annoying and bad. And especially the other practitioners at this point were in my mind, were annoying. And one of the things is that there was a very narrow hall to walk from the meditation hall and into the common area. And there was a lot of impatience in the mind. And everybody was walking very mindfully and very slowly. And so I would have to really be, everybody would notice if I try to scoot my way besides the other yogis. Like that would look really odd if I was the one impatient yogi that had to, get the other people out of the way and get ahead of everybody. So I had to sort of walk behind this very slow pace. And I could just see my mind like, rah, 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 and lift your feet and come on now. I know we can be mindful, but we don't have to be that slow, come on now, walk faster. And the funny thing is that there was some pleasantness connected with it. So I was checking, what is the pull here? Like, what's keeping this aversion going? And I was noticing that the self-righteousness has a real pleasant quality to it. So, okay, it's the pleasant quality of self-righteousness. That's the hook here, because you would think that it would be a suffering state, but initially it was like, okay, it's the hook. And then as I kept noticing, I also noticed that, and yet when the mind kept doing it, that there was a great sense of isolation that came up, because there was this sense of, division, right? And the mind being in this aversive state really gave rise to this sense of deep isolation. The mind always being, critical. And in that seeing of the patterns of the mind and seeing the dukkha nature of it, recognizing dukkha where I couldn't see dukkha, right? This is an example of dukkha was there, but dukkha wasn't recognized. But if I could stay there with mindfulness and just check it out, working with the feeling tones, at some point out of that seeing, recognizing dukkha, that abandoning of that pattern happened by itself. So it happened out of wisdom, not like, okay, bad Kristina for having an aversive mind, but that interest and willingness to be with aversion, and that led to the release of it. So one way we can work with it. And then we can also notice when this clinging and attachment or strong opinions, aversion about certain things, when it moves more into this becoming, what we often call selfing. So there's this self-making process that happens around our strong aversions and attachment. And we can start to notice when we start to form a strong sense of, okay, I am like this. This is who I am. This is, my identity. This is how it has to be. And we can see if we can notice, be really honest with it and say, yeah, there is probably some sense of safety that happens with this sense of like, I know who I am. This is who I am. Right. So again, there's pleasantness in it. It gives us a sense of knowing myself. But if we check it a little bit more, we can see that that strong sense of self-identity, it doesn't hold up to reality. And so they're suffering with it because we can't, brace ourselves against things changing all the time. But these are some ideas.